Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about what you can learn from a summer job that maybe isn't your first choice. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about what you can learn from a summer job that you do not 100% love. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Sometimes law students are disappointed at the summer job they end up taking. Maybe it's not the exact type of organization they wanted, the precise type of work, the ideal location, and so on. But there's a lot to be learned from any legal job. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think a lot of this can be kind of the attitude you have about it going in.
And what type of things do you think people can get out of a summer job, even if it's not their ideal job?
I think there's a lot of things that you can get pretty much out of any summer job. I think just working in a professional environment is something maybe you've never done before, especially if you went straight through. Specifically working in a legal environment, I think will be helpful. Just learning, kind of how things go. You can get a writing sample. You can get, research and writing skills. You can get references for the future. There are a lot of different things that I think you can learn and walk away with out of any summer job at all.
I think that's right. I think if it's nothing more than learning to start being a professional, establishing your professional identity, dealing with all types of office politics, just kind of seeing, how does this world operate? I think for a lot of people who are coming in without a lot of professional experience, that alone is a sufficient way to spend a summer, whether it's working on something that you love or something you don't love or you're not that interested in. I think if you treat it almost like an anthropological experiment, you can actually get a lot out of it.
Definitely. I think that you can kind of take a step back, especially if it's not like the area of law that you're interested in long term or the one that you wanted. So just taking a step back and saying, what am I going to get just out of working? It doesn't necessarily have to be the area that you expect to, work in later on.
Right. And I think, you'll obviously learn some type of substantive knowledge. But, oftentimes, say for the first summer, particularly, people have just kind of taken whatever job they can get, and that's totally fine. I think what you want to be thinking about this summer is shaping it into something that you can talk about later. Because when you do interviews for maybe your second summer, which might be more focused on what you're actually looking at, or, jobs after school, which hopefully are going to be closer to what you really want, you're going to have to talk about this experience, and you want to be framing it in a way that is actually, sounds like you got something out of it.
Absolutely. And I always say that to 1Ls, that I think that the first summer is sort of a gift because there's not much pressure on finding, the thing that you really want to do long term. I think it more is just about the experience and having something to talk about and, feeling like there's something substantive that you can take with you and talk about in interviews. So particularly the 1L summer, most people are not going to get a job, that fits exactly what they want. There are those 1L like BigLaw jobs that are few and far between. And most 1Ls, get kind of one of a few different things that all 1Ls get. And I don't think it really needs to mean anything in terms of, your long-term career goals. But I do think that you should think about, how am I going to explain this in an interview, and what's this going to look like on my resume, and, what are the things I can take out of it? So I think it's a gift. I think it's sort of a freebie in a way.
No, I think that's right. I mean, the path of your legal career is certainly not determined by what you do your first summer. So I don't think there's anything to worry about. And I think it's just a question of making the most of whatever experience you have, even if it's not something that you're necessarily like 100% thrilled about. Well, for somebody who's going into this summer job and they know they're somewhat disappointed, they feel bummed about it, they're not thrilled about what they got, what advice do you have?
Well, first I'd say, maybe have those feelings and work through them a little bit. And I think we've talked about that before, that maybe you need to talk to somebody or kind of, just deal with it, because that's okay that you are disappointed, you didn't get what you wanted, and you're maybe not feeling great about it. And then I think you move on and you say, I'm going to have a good attitude. I'm going to go in with an open mind, and I'm going to say, what can I contribute to this job? And, how am I going to make the most of this situation? Because I do think a lot of this is about, I think a lot of it is kind of how you go into it and the attitude you have, and kind of focusing on the positive, because there are positives out of any job. I can't think of any job where I couldn't tell you 5 things that I think you could take out of that job and that you could contribute to the job.
Right. And I think both of those are so key. Even if you, for whatever reason, are not super thrilled about the job that you've ended up in, someone hired you. So, they hired you to do something, and with the hope that you're going to make their lives easier, or the lives of the people you're working for. So I think I thought your point about, what you can contribute is really good, because it's not just, what can you take away? Hopefully you're doing work that is helping someone. I mean, that's usually what lawyers are doing. We're doing something to try to solve someone's problems. So I think if you frame it as what you can contribute, I think that may help people feel more connected to what they're doing, and less about like, well, this isn't setting me up for my career in like securities,
Yeah. I mean, also, I think particularly if we're talking about this summer, I think you need to take a step back and say most people probably aren't exactly where they want to be right now, and are
just
not
in the world.
Yeah. So I think you need to say, I made the best of a really difficult situation. And, what does that say about me? Because most people are not exactly doing what they want to be doing right now. And I think we all feel like, we've had to make the best of it.
Right. And I think it's important, if you do have a job in the summer of 2021, to recognize this is actually an opportunity, because a lot of people last year didn't have this opportunity. They thought they had jobs secured, and then suddenly, poof, all those went away. So, at least you have something.
Exactly. I think if you have a job right now, that's great. And you should pat yourself on the back, whatever it is.
Right. And, if people are listening to this and they don't have a job yet, well, we've got other podcasts on that. It's not too late, so you can go out and find one. And I think one of the things people can really try to take away too is to try to build some personal relationships. Even if the work is not exactly what you're looking for, even if you don't find the job like so compelling or so interesting, you're going to be working with other people. And so these are great opportunities to kind of dig in, try to make some new friends, try to make some professional contacts, because nobody stays in a job forever these days. So, people are moving around all the time. And in a way, this is your professional network. So you may as well try to connect with people.
Absolutely. And I would say along those lines, make sure that those people don't know that you're not really happy with the job and that it's not your first choice. So I think that's part of the relationship building. I think seeming positive and into it is going to, build those relationships more.
Right. You want to be that person who is enthusiastic and eager to help and eager to learn. Not that person who clearly sees this as beneath them and isn't putting in the time and effort and just has a generally bad attitude. I mean, basically about the only way you can really screw this up is to be the person that comes off as not wanting to be there.
Absolutely. And I'd also say, even if you go into it thinking 100% that this is not where you want to be and it's not what you want to practice later on, you really don't know. I know a lot of people that ended up, particularly during the last economic crisis, in areas that they were not happy with, that they did not want to be at. They were very upset about it. And a lot of them stayed even after they had the chance to leave. And it turned out that maybe it was a better fit. Like maybe they had an open mind and it worked out. So I would say don't ever be 100% sure that it's not where you want to be.
Right. I mean, the counterpoint to that is, I took firm jobs saying I definitely want to go into litigation. And, maybe if they'd stuck me in some other random area, it actually would have been a better fit for me. Who knows?
I think that's so true. And I always tell summer associates that they should try an assignment in an area that's completely foreign to them, or something they think they're totally not interested in, because I think it's worth exploring, because law school definitely sets you on a certain path and mostly tells you about certain, areas of practice. And so, why not try something really different?
Yeah, I think just be open-minded. Like you said, you really don't know. And sometimes people, they take a public interest job their first summer and then they later go into big law. And then years later, they're reflecting back being like, you know what? I really think I actually liked the work I was doing because of 1L summer more than this, and then basically circle back to doing that. So you don't know how the long run is going to play out, basically.
Yeah. And I think it can be sort of freeing to not be, in this area that you were sure you wanted to be in. I think it kind of opens some possibilities, and maybe in a certain way you could feel, less pressure about it. So I just think it's kind of how you frame it in your own mind going into the job.
Right. And I guess, worst case, maybe you learn what you definitely don't want to do in the long run. And that's actually useful information too.
Definitely.
All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. So sometimes the job seems like it might be a really great fit before you start, but then it turns kind of disappointing for any number of reasons. What can people do in this scenario?
Well, I think there's usually something you can do probably to alter the situation in some way. So, there's usually things that maybe can be changed. Maybe there's someone you can talk to. Maybe you can approach it from a different, point of view. Maybe there's some way you can learn something, differently. So I think you should kind of explore options to improve the situation.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I had one summer job that frankly was fairly disastrous. Sometimes these things just happen, unfortunately, and it doesn't necessarily reflect on you. You might just be caught up in like a bizarre scenario or be working for someone who is a terrible boss. It's a difficult situation because, you went into this thinking like, oh, this is going to be so great. And then suddenly it's really not great. So, hopefully the organization might have ways to improve it. I mean, honestly, sometimes I think you just have to kind of suck it up. And
sometimes you get stuck with a bad person. There's somebody, who's in charge of the assignment you're working on, who's not ideal. And sometimes it has nothing to do with you. And, people will tell you like, this is a difficult person to work for. But that's kind of a good experience for down the line also. Like being in a situation that's difficult, you're going to learn something from that.
Right. I mean, I think, if nothing else, it's going to teach you a lot about that workplace. And you can evaluate whether you would want to continue, if it was an option, to be in that same workplace. And also, to really evaluate how this happened so it doesn't happen with your next, quote unquote dream job. So, if you think that this was like the job for you and then you go in and you find that you hate the day-to-day work, well, there was a miscalculation somewhere along the line. I think a bad boss is a kind of a different scenario because that's a little more out of your control. But, this could be providing information about maybe you're being, I don't know, overly optimistic or just not really understanding, the scenario of what this type of work looks like. But, you definitely can use this as a learning experience to say, you know what, maybe family law is really not for me.
And maybe sort of the values or the things you think are important in a job change. Sometimes people just want the job that makes the most money.
Right.
Sometimes they want the job that's going to give them the most, flexibility in their life. And I think those things can change over time. And it's about, paying attention and listening to yourself and saying, what's important to me right now.
Right. So I think if you're in a job that, you're really excited about and you start to have these issues, you really got to figure out why, what is going on. Were there things that you did that contributed to this, or you just caught up in a bad situation? Is the work itself not the right work? Is the office environment not the right place for you? Are people like saying or doing things that are inappropriate? There are all kinds of things that can go wrong in a legal job.
Also, I think you should evaluate, are all these things happening in the job, or is it you in that job?
Mm-hmm.
Are you putting a lot of pressure on yourself? Are there things you could change? Are you taking on too much? So I think also, kind of seeing, is it this particular situation? Is it something going on with yourself? I just think look at it from all angles.
Right. I think talking with somebody that you can trust, maybe somebody outside of the, the environment you're working in, or, when this happened with me, like I went to my mentor who I'd become friendly with and kind of like ran the situation by her. And, she was like, wow, this is really terrible. And I don't really know what to tell you to do, so, but even just having that validation from someone who's like, yeah, this is not okay. This is not normal. Like this should not be happening. I think it can be helpful. I mean, obviously you're probably burning that bridge because they're probably going to tell someone else about it. So maybe you should go talk to a therapist or something, or a coach. But, I think in some cases you can improve the situation, and then you should do that and try to make it better. But in other cases, it's just an unfortunate situation. And I think it's time probably to start thinking about your next steps.
And I think some people sort of have the opposite problem of what we're talking about, where they have this idea of something being a dream job and they have trouble letting that go.
Right.
And so I think that's something also to think about, like sort of your dream job could be the worst fit. And so you need to look at that also.
Right. Or just that you're not being realistic. Like maybe it does have a lot of great things that are good for you, but the reality is the day-to-day work of working in the legal profession can be very demanding. So probably every day you're not going to wake up being like, oh, I'm so excited to go to my dream job if you've just gotten home at 3 a.m. Like some of this might just be reality hitting people.
And just what it's like to start out in anything.
Right. Like it's difficult. You're going to be working a lot.
Where you don't really know what you're doing out of any of these jobs. So
yeah.
I would just say it's all should be a learning experience.
Exactly. I think, do your best, evaluate the situation. And then ultimately, this is really only one summer. So if things are not going in a great direction and it's kind of turning into a mess, well, you know what? You've only got a few more weeks probably.
And also, we talked about the 1L summer being a freebie, but, sometimes the 2L summer doesn't work out. And I also don't think that means something for the rest of your life.
No.
And there's another job and another way to do something different and a path. And maybe it's going to take you a little longer to get where you need to go. But I think some people get really stuck if it doesn't work out, or you don't get an offer, or it's not what you really wanted to do. And I think it's best to focus on, okay, what's the next step of somewhere that gets me to where I need to go? And how can I kind of, put this on my resume and have a story that makes sense for moving forward?
Absolutely. I mean, speaking as someone who had a terrible 2L summer experience, it doesn't matter. In the end, that just became fodder for like a blog post in this podcast. And who could have predicted we would be talking about it today?
Exactly. And I think, like we've said, if you don't have a job yet, it's still not too late. And ultimately, you want to find something to do for the summer, and there's something to do for everybody during the summer in some form. And that's what you need to focus on.
Exactly. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit again. What about disappointment over the way that a job might be playing out in these strange COVID times? I mean, I'm guessing a lot of these summer positions may still be virtual or maybe some type of hybrid. And if nothing else, they're probably going to have pretty limited social events. So, the traditional kind of like big blowout parties and things that people had for, especially in law firms, or even, like in New York, they would have huge parties that all different types of lawyers were invited to all summer long. And it was like super fun for everyone. That stuff's probably still not happening, right?
I don't think so. I think, even if things are going to be able to be in person, they're obviously going to be much more low key and different. But what I would say is, rather than compare it to what you thought it was going to be, or what you've heard, or what, you pictured a summer associate position being. I would just focus on what the reality is, which I think is where we all are right now.
Right.
And have to let go of the way things used to be, the before times. And we have to say, where are we now and where can we find some, joy and meaning in what we're doing right now. I would also say there's some advantages to not having all of those things. I know they all sound really fun, but they're a lot of pressure.
They're really honestly not that much fun. I mean, I was like a career summer associate. I did it 3 times. I don't think I enjoyed a single one of those parties, to be honest.
Yeah, I've spent many, many summers doing them. And, even on the employer side, they do seem fun at first, and they get less fun over time. But I'll say a lot of bad things can happen at those events also. There's actually, more of a chance you're going to lose your offer because of some situation that happened at one of those events. And so I would say there's less pressure. And I know some of these Zoom things can be awkward, or things are going to be probably more smaller groups, one-on-one. But rather, kind of move past it's awkward. It's awkward for everyone. We all know that. And then just get into it. Figure out the best way to connect with someone in that situation.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it. So, back to our original point, you may as well just try to take advantage of getting what you can out of this, whatever scenario exists, and, taking away from it whatever you can learn. And not getting fixated on this idea that, you don't get to go like to the golf course or whatever. I mean, you want to talk about awkward? Try like being asked to swim in a swimming pool with like the rest of the law firm as a summer associate. I mean, that was horrific.
That's the thing I always remind people. Some of these events sound really fun in terms of what you're doing, but it would be fun if you were doing them with your friends.
Right.
But you're not. You're doing them mostly with a bunch of, older partners.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, honestly, some of those are just like, wow, okay, do we really have to do this? So, I mean, maybe you're not really missing much. And you're right. I mean, any event like that was an absolute potential minefield. And every single summer you heard crazy stories about people getting their offers pulled because of bad decision making they made while drunk at a party. So, hey, you don't have that problem.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's kind of a gift to not have to do all of that stuff. And I've heard some positive things actually about some of the virtual events, genuinely positive things. And same with the interviews. So I would say I really do think there are advantages. And I think we might look back when we have to go back into sort of the more social world and maybe miss some of these times I'm thinking.
I went to my first Zoom wedding as a guest last weekend, and it was actually legitimately really fun. I mean, I had no idea what to expect. I was just like, wow, this could be super awkward. But it was actually great. I had a really good time.
Yeah, so I bet you never would have thought that that's something you've enjoyed or ever done.
No, and I feel like now people might even just like set up a stream, at their wedding, even if it can be in person, just for the people who can't make it. Because there are definitely weddings like I wanted to attend, but I couldn't go for some reason. I'm sure I would have enjoyed it, at least partly on Zoom.
Yeah. No, I think that it will kind of change going forward. Maybe there will be some more options, for virtual ways to participate in things where it makes sense. So I just think we should sort of appreciate, what this is right now and some of the advantages that come out of it.
Well, and I think too, like dialing back the social events, particularly for these big law firms, if anybody has stuff, it's fine if it's just like you're a single person, but even then, if you're an introvert, you probably don't want to be going to all of these things all the time. But anyone who has like family or even pets and things is actually, you would be gone these really, really long days. And it was just considered totally normal that you would basically never be home. So I think for some people that may be better as well.
Yeah, I think there are definitely some advantages. And I think in certain ways you can sort of participate in a better way in these more kind of one-on-one smaller situations. I think people are sort of paying attention more. Mm-hmm. If it's you and another person on Zoom versus you and another person in a really loud corner of a cocktail party.
Right, where you're both tired and like have work to do and don't really want to be there anyway. I think that's a great point. I mean, I think people, when they're trying to make the connection, if people are reaching out to you, they're legitimately reaching out to you to try to make that connection. And so I think that's definitely something to take advantage of.
I'd also say something we've talked about before, but if there are things in person, just make sure that you're sort of following the lead of how they're doing things and what sort of, the guidelines are, make sure you're kind of fitting into what they're sort of expecting in terms of social distancing or masks or outside or whatever it is. Because I think that we may sort of slowly get back into those things.
Right.
So I just be careful that you're sort of being aware of what they expect of you.
I think that's right. And again, be careful what you're putting on your social media if it's public. Just generally being cognizant of being a responsible person in these odd times where people have very different viewpoints on what might be acceptable.
Exactly. So I would say just kind of stay in a way where you're not being really outspoken.
Right. Well, before we wrap up, one question. Is it ever okay to quit a summer position if it's going really, really poorly?
I think I've seen this once in my years of being in this industry. I would say it should be an absolute last resort. There are situations where I think for your own sort of health and, personal concerns that you need to do that. But I don't think you quit a summer job because you don't like it.
Right. No, I agree. I think if you are in a position of, danger to your physical or emotional or mental health, and it's gotten to a point where you just cannot bear to do this anymore, I think that's different than just being like, well, I don't really love the work and I'm kind of bored and it would be nice to have like a little extra vacation. Like generally speaking, you should just stick it out.
Absolutely. I mean, and any of these summer jobs they can't be that long because it's the summer.
Right.
So I think usually you can do that. I would also say if you are having a really hard time, talk to them before you just quit. If it is kind of, personal issues going on, maybe there is a way for them to scale it back or offer you something. Because usually, they'll want to work with you. They recruited you there. They hired you. So at least give them a chance before you just like cut it off if it's that bad, if it's super extreme.
Right.
But other than that, I think you just have to say, this wasn't a great summer. I'm not really enjoying it, but I can finish it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of things like, someone's being sexually harassed or something. I mean, that's a different scenario than just like, oh, I didn't get the assignment that I wanted.
Absolutely. And also just remember, you're going to have to explain it if you left early, usually. So, you can't just quit and then think you'll just say like, oh, well, it only ended up being a half summer job. That's
Right.
going to be.
And I think it's different, if you have like a family emergency or something, I think typically an employer is, eager to work with you in that scenario to like have a way to close this out that works for everyone. And that's definitely something, that if you really need to go and like take care of someone or whatnot, like talk to them about it, but definitely don't just sort of like ghost your employer and never come back.
Absolutely. So I think if you're in a situation like that, you need to be fairly open with them about what's going on and try to just, leave on the best terms.
Right.
But I just think that's an extreme situation. And so, that's the only time you do something like that.
Agreed. Well, any final thoughts on this topic before we wrap up?
My final thought is really where we started, which is that I think a lot of this is about the attitude. And I know there's a lot of disappointment now going on just generally. And so I think you kind of need to go in and just make the best of this situation. This is an extremely unusual time that will probably never happen to you again. And so maybe it feels unfair that it was, during this important summer and job in your life. But I really think that there's something to be, had out of any of these jobs. And so it is about going in with kind of an open and positive attitude.
I definitely agree. I think that's, I mean, what choice do you have really? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. With that, we are out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or Allison at lawschooltoolbox.com, Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.